Welcome to a story that drifts in on the tide of a distant, fog-shrouded sea. A story not of clear answers, but of whispers carried on the brine, of memories that are not our own, yet feel as familiar as the pull of the moon on the water. Tonight, we will let the clatter of trick weapons and the fervor of the hunt fade into the background, and instead listen to the older, more sorrowful song that hums beneath the stones of Yharnam and the fishing hamlet's piers. It is a song of a mother's grief, echoing across the cosmos, and the sea that became her cradle and her tomb. So find a comfortable rest, close your eyes, and let the murmur of the waves and the lore of Kos carry you into a gentle, contemplative sleep. Imagine, if you will, a place where the sky is not a sky, but a ceiling of bruised, weeping clouds, pressing down so low you feel you could reach up and wring the damp from their gray bellies. This is the fishing hamlet, a place that exists not so much on a map, but in the saturated, suffocating space between a memory and a wound. The air here is thick, a palpable broth of salt spray and decay, and the wind does not blow so much as it sighs. A long, weary exhalation that has been ongoing for centuries. Every surface is slick, beaded with a perpetual, cold sweat. The wooden planks of the sagging piers are not merely wet. They are saturated through, their grains swollen with the memory of the sea, their nails weeping rust like old blood. The very ground gives way underfoot, a mixture of black mud and crushed seashells that sucks at your boots with a soft, hungry sound. And through it all, the rain falls, not in furious lashes, but in a constant, melancholic drizzle, a mist that seems less like weather and more like the atmosphere's own quiet, unceasing tears. This is the epicenter, the still point around which a great and terrible tragedy orbits, a place where the boundary between the physical world and something far more ancient and sorrowful has been worn thin, like a shoreline eroded by a grieving ocean. The inhabitants of this place are as much a part of the landscape as the listing shacks and the tangled nets. They are the cursed, the transformed souls who have been so steeped in the hamlet's unique misery that their very flesh has listened to the sea's whispering and answered its call. They move with a slow, dragging gait, their forms obscured by tattered, oilskin cloaks that are forever damp. But beneath those hoods, the sea has left its mark. Their skin has taken on a slick, scaly quality, a gray-green pallor reminiscent of a fish belly left too long in the sun. Their eyes, when visible, are wide and unblinking black pools that hold no human light, only the deep, vacant reflection of the abyssal waters. Some have mouths that gape, working soundlessly, while others have limbs that have fused or twisted into something resembling fins, their fingers webbed with translucent skin. They do not speak in words, but in guttural clicks and low, bubbling moans, a language of the depths that speaks of a profound, inarticulate sorrow. They are not monsters in the simple sense. They are a people who have become a living elegy, their very bodies a testament to an event so catastrophic it rewrote their biology, binding them forever to the salt and the sorrow of this place. You can feel it in the air, this ancient, unresolved tragedy. It is in the taste of the salt, in the chill of the mist, in the way the very light seems to struggle to penetrate the gloom, leaving everything in a perpetual, twilight state of remembrance. And at the heart of this sorrow, both its source and its most sacred relic, lies the great and mysterious entity known as Kos, or, as some in their more philosophical moments whisper, Cosm. Her nature is not like that of the other celestial beings one might hear of in fevered tales. She did not arrive in a shower of cold, intellectual starlight or from the stark geometry of a nightmare frontier. Kos came from the sea, from the great, primal and teeming womb of the world's waters. She was a being deeply, intrinsically connected to the natural world, yet utterly alien to it all the same. Her origins are a mystery that lies beyond the curve of the horizon, in the deep black trenches where pressure crushes all light and thought. She was a great one, a being of immense power, yet her story is not one of distant, cosmic indifference, but of a profound and tangible presence. She was corporeal, physical, a mother who carried a child within her. And in her journey across the starry ocean, she found herself drawn or perhaps wounded and forced to this lonely, rocky shore. She did not descend as a conqueror or a deity demanding worship. She washed up, a castaway of the cosmos, a leviathan beached on a world unprepared for her grace and her tragedy. Her body, vast and pale, would have been a terrifying spectacle, a mountain of unknown flesh. Yet the law suggests a gentleness to her, a maternal aura that permeates the very memory of her presence. She was a symbiote with the sea, her life force intertwined with the tides and the currents, and in her, the concepts of the celestial and the oceanic became one and the same. Her death on this foreign shore was not a dramatic, cataclysmic event, but a slow, quiet, and deeply sorrowful passing. It was the death of a mother, far from home, in a place that could not comprehend her. The circumstances are shrouded in the hamlet's perpetual mist. Did she succumb to wounds from her journey through the cold void? Was her biology incompatible with this world's atmosphere, its physics? Or was her death tied, in some inextricable way, to the life she carried within her? We cannot know for certain. What we do know is that her massive form came to rest upon the jagged rocks and the wet sand, her presence a quiet, radiating miracle to the simple folk of the hamlet, and her passing a wound in the fabric of local reality. Her body did not fade or dissipate. It remained, a great pale monument at the water's edge, a silent testament to what had been lost. The sea, which had been her domain, now became her tomb, and the whispers that once spoke of life and depth now carried the hollow notes of a lament. In this, she is a uniquely sympathetic figure among the pantheon of great ones, not a schema, not a distant intellect, but a mother. Her story is one of vulnerability, of a connection to life and birth that feels almost, terribly, human in its tragedy. Her physical, corporeal presence in the world makes her suffering immediate and visceral. This was not an abstract god, but a being of flesh and significance who died, alone and grieving, on a strange beach. From this profound loss, another voice joined the chorus of the hamlet's sorrow, a voice that was, in its infancy, the very antithesis of the sea's deep, rumbling hum. It was the cry of a child. The orphan of Kos was born not into a world of warmth and safety, but into a world of death and salt. Its first breath was not air, but the choking mist of its mother's fading life. Its first sight, not a loving face, but the grim, storm-racked sky of a cursed shaw. This was no ordinary child. It was a celestial offspring, a being of immense latent power, its very essence a concentration of its mother's lineage and the raw, untamed potential of the cosmos. Yet in that moment of birth, it was simply an orphan, small and mewling and utterly alone beside the colossal, still form of its parent. Its cry was not one of simple infant need, but a sound that seemed to hold the entirety of its circumstance, the shock of existence, the pang of abandonment, the confusion of finding itself in a world so cold and unwelcoming. It was a silent scream, for its anguish was of a quality that transcended mere sound, a psychic tremor that radiated out from the hamlet, a vibration of pure, undiluted loss. This cry, this boundless, silent shriek of anguish and rage, did not simply fade into the mist. It was too potent, too fundamental a violation of the natural order. A child of a great one, left to wail on a corpse-littered shore, the universe itself seemed to recoil at the injustice. The orphan's grief was not a passive thing, it was an active, shaping force. Its pain was so absolute, so world-ending in its intensity, that it began to warp the very substance of reality around it. The air grew thicker, the sea more restless, the very memories of the place curdling into something new and terrible. This child's cry became the foundational catalyst, the first and most powerful note in a song of retribution. It was a plea for a mother that could not be answered, a rage against a fate that could not be undone, and this raw, emotional energy needed a vessel. It could not exist in the waking world, for the waking world has rules, however fragile. So it tore a new one. From the fabric of dream and memory, from the collective guilt and sin that would soon be sown there, the orphan's anguish gave birth to a new dimension, a hellish, recursive reflection of that terrible day on the beach, a prison built from pain. This was the hunter's nightmare, a realm whose sole purpose was to punish, to trap, and to eternally reenact the moment of its own creation. It was not a place one could simply walk into. It was a gravitational well of sorrow, and at its center, forever bound to the shore, was the spectral form of the orphan, its cry now the very engine of this perpetual, storm-lashed hell. The sin that fed this nascent nightmare that gave it structure and purpose did not come from the hamlet itself, but from across the water, carried in the hearts and minds of scholars from a place called Biogenwith. Their arrival was not a chance event. It was a calculated invasion, a pilgrimage of intellect drawn to the site of a miracle, or what they perceived as one. Word, somehow, had reached the hallowed halls of the college, whispers of a seaside root of the healing church, of a carcass of a god washed ashore, of a hamlet where the line between man and something more had been blurred. For Willem and his followers who thirsted for evolution, for eyes on the inside, for communion with the cosmos, this was not a tragedy to be mourned. It was an opportunity to be dissected. And so an expedition was formed, led by two figures who would become forever stained by what they would do. Jayaman, the first hunter, a practical man of action, and his prodigious student, Lady Maria, a woman of noble blood and formidable skill. Their motives, cloaked in the language of academic pursuit, were a volatile mixture of desperate curiosity and a terrifying hunger. They sought the source of the hamlet's strange affliction, believing it to hold the key to ascension. They searched for eyes, for insight, for the physical evidence of a communion with a higher power. They wanted to understand the nature of the Great Ones, and in the body of Kos and her transformed villagers, they believed they had found their most profound textbook. What began as study quickly curdled into atrocity. The villagers, these simple, cursed folk who had lived alongside the body of their gentle, fallen giant, were not seen as people, but as specimens. The hunters, with their cold steel and colder purpose, fell upon them. It was a massacre, a brutal, one-sided culling driven by a need to see what was inside, to find the mechanism of their transformation. The sanctity of the hamlet was violated, its silence broken not by the gentle lap of waves or the mournful cries of its people, but by the sounds of slaughter and the clinical, detached curiosity of the scholars who followed in the hunter's wake. And then they turned their attention to the main prize, the source of it all, the massive, pallid body of Kos herself. We can only imagine the scene, the scholars, their robes stained with salt and the blood of the villagers, gathered around the colossal form beached upon the shore. They would have swarmed over it, their tools probing, cutting, seeking the secrets they believed were locked within its flesh. This was the ultimate desecration, a violation of a grave of a mother, performed not in rage, but in a calm, calculated hunger for knowledge. It was an act of profound, cosmic impiety. And in their rummaging through the remains of a god, they found what they were looking for, though they likely did not comprehend its true significance at the time. They discovered a cord, a pale, writhing thing that seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a third of an umbilical cord. To them, it was a relic, a key, a tangible piece of a great one's power. They saw it as a means to an end, a conduit to the cosmos they so desperately sought. But in their triumphant discovery, they failed to see the deeper, more terrible truth. This was not merely a source of power, it was a symbol. It was the physical, severed connection between a mother and her child. It represented the very bond they had shattered, the life they had extinguished, the orphanhood they had cemented. In their hands, this pale cord was not just a key to enlightenment. It was the very rope with which they were weaving their own noose, the focal point of a curse that would bind them for all eternity. They had come seeking eyes, but in their brutal search, they had blinded themselves to the simple, devastating reality of what they had done. They had killed a community, desecrated a mother, and orphaned a child. And in taking that cord, They had taken upon themselves the weight of that sin, a weight that would soon become a whole new world, built just for them. The rain, which had been a constant, gentle weeping, seemed now to fall with a new and heavier intent, as if the sky itself were trying to wash the blood from the black, shell-strewn mud. The silence that returned to the hamlet after the hunters and scholars departed was not the quiet of peace, but the thick, suffocating silence of a violated sanctuary. It was a silence that hummed with the echoes of screams that had been cut short, with the phantom scent of gunpowder and viscera that now mingled indelibly with the salt and decay. The bodies of the villagers lay where they fell, their twisted forms slowly being reclaimed by the insistent mud and the ceaseless drizzle, their final, bubbling moans absorbed by the sodden air. The hamlet was no longer just a place of sorrow. It was a crime scene on a cosmic scale, its every wet plank and listing shack now a witness to an act of such profound transgression that the very laws of cause and effect seemed to groan under the strain. The sea, which had once been Kos's cradle, now seemed to watch with a cold, ancient fury. The waves that lapped at the shore did so with a new rhythm, a slower, more deliberate cadence, like the measured breathing of a slumbering leviathan stirred to anger. The water, once a deep, mysterious gray-green, now appeared darker, almost black in the perpetual twilight, as if stained by the grief that had been poured into it. It was in this charged and wounded atmosphere that the orphan's silent cry found its resonance. The child's anguish was a seed, but the sin of Biogenwith was the rich, bloody soil in which it took root. The two forces, the raw, primal loss of the orphan and the calculated, intellectual sin of the scholars, collided in the hamlet's saturated air, and from their violent union, the hunter's nightmare began to truly coalesce. It did not form all at once, but like a stain spreading through damp cloth, it seeped into the edges of reality, a psychic infection born of a wound that could not heal. The first to feel its pull were those most directly stained by the blood of the hamlet. Jayaman, the first hunter, a man who had always prided himself on his practicality, on the clean, definitive cut of his blade, found that the memories of that day would not be so cleanly severed. In his waking moments, he might have been able to rationalize it, to frame it as a grim necessity in the grand, blood-soaked tapestry of their quest for evolution. But in sleep, there was no such refuge. The damp chill of the hamlet began to seep into his dreams. He would feel the suck of the mud on his boots, hear the guttural, choking cries of the fishmen not as monsters, but as a people, see the vast, dead eye of Kos staring sightlessly at a sky she did not know. He would wake in his workshop, drenched in a cold sweat that smelled not of fear, but of the sea, the phantom weight of his trick weapon feeling less like a tool and more like a brand of his own damnation. The nightmare was not yet a place he could be physically dragged into, but it was a hook in his soul, a tether of guilt that pulled at him across the veil of sleep, reminding him that some debts are not paid with blood, but are only compounded by it. For Lady Maria, the descent was swifter, more profound, and infinitely more personal. She had been Jayaman's student, his equal in skill, perhaps even his superior in grace. But where Jayaman saw the hunt as a dirty job, Maria had initially carried a sense of nobility to it, a belief that their work, however violent, served a higher purpose of understanding. The fishing hamlet shattered that illusion. The clinical detachment required for the butchery, the way the scholars had picked through the remains of the villagers, and the god with the dispassionate curiosity of anatomists, had sickened her to her very core. She had thrown her beloved Rakuyo down the old well in a fit of self-loathing and disgust, a symbolic rejection of the hunter's path, of the violence she had so expertly wielded. But casting away the weapon could not cast away the memory. The nightmare found in her a fertile ground, a conscience so acutely wounded that it became a doorway. Her guilt was not a vague unease. It was a specific, searing shame for every life she had taken, for her role in the desecration of the mother and the orphaning of the child. And so, when the hunter's nightmare solidified from a psychic echo into a tangible, recursive dimension, it was Lady Maria whom it claimed first and most completely. She did not merely dream of the hamlet. She was taken there, becoming its eternal warden, a prisoner and a guardian bound to a chair in a clock tower that overlooked the very sin she sought to escape, forever tormented by the memory of the blood on her hands, a relic of a past she could neither forgive nor forget. The curse, however, was not content with merely trapping the direct perpetrators. Its nature was one of symbolic resonance, a poison that sought out all who shared in the blood-soaked legacy that Biogenworth had initiated. The healing church, born from the schism at the college, and the discoveries made with the old blood, became a primary vector for the nightmare's influence. Every hunter who ever took up the mantle, who ever partook of the communion, and felt the beastly scourge course through their veins, now carried a faint echo of that original sin. They were all children of that first, terrible hunt, inheritors of a legacy of violence that began not with the beasts of Yharnam, but with the fisher folk of the hamlet. The nightmare became a purgatory for these hunters, a place where the most blood-drunk and lost among them were dragged when their minds and souls finally broke under the weight of their own atrocities. They would find themselves wandering the twisted, familiar yet alien streets of Yharnam, but a Yharnam lit by a constant, hellish orange moon, where the air was thick with the coppery scent of old blood, and the anguished cries of beasts were intermingled with the distant, ever-present sound of the sea. This Yharnam of the nightmare was a perfect, terrible prison. Its geometry was just off enough to be disorienting. Familiar cathedrals leaned at impossible angles, streets coiled back on themselves in nonsensical loops, and the cobblestones were perpetually slick with a dampness that was more than rain. It was a landscape of pure memory and punishment, designed to force its inhabitants to relive their sins for all eternity. The beasts here were more savage, more relentless, their howls carrying a desperate, knowing edge, as if they too were aware of the endless cycle of violence in which they were trapped. And towering over it all, both physically and symbolically, was the burning, corpse-strewn vista of the nightmare of Mensis, a place where the church's most extreme and reckless attempts to reach the cosmos had culminated in a different kind of hell. A mindless, shrieking frenzy beneath a brain that hung from a black sky like a malignant, pulsing moon. But even this was a tributary, a secondary manifestation flowing into the greater, darker ocean of the hunter's nightmare. All paths in this recursive hell, no matter how twisted, ultimately led back to the source, back to the sea. For deep within the nightmare, hidden behind the clock tower where Maria sat in her silent vigil, was a path that descended through a cave of weeping, phosphorescent mushrooms and out onto a familiar, soul-crushing shore. It was the fishing hamlet, but the hamlet as it existed in the heart of the curse. Here, the rain fell with a relentless, punishing force, and the sea was a churning, violent maelstrom of black water and white foam. The shacks were more dilapidated, the air thicker with the stench of rot and a profound, psychic misery. The remaining villagers, or rather, the nightmare's memory of them, were more aggressive, their sorrow having fermented over countless cycles into a festering, mindless rage. They were no longer just mournful witnesses. They were the vengeful spirits of the wronged, their guttural clicks now sounding like accusations on the wind. And there, on the same stretch of shore where the original tragedy unfolded, lay the massive, spectral carcass of Kos. It was a ghost, a memory given form, its pale flesh glowing with a sickly, internal light, a monument to a death that had become the foundation of this entire world of punishment. And on the sand, beside the colossal, still form of its mother, the orphan waited. It was no longer a mewling infant, but a spectral being of immense and terrifying power, a manifestation of the rage and grief that had been left to fester for untold ages. Its form was a grotesque mockery of life, a pale, writhing thing that seemed to be made of solidified anguish, clutching the phantom of a placenta as both a weapon and a wretched comfort blanket. This was the heart of the nightmare, the anchor point of the entire cursed dimension. The orphan's eternal, silent scream was the energy that sustained this pocket of hell, its boundless pain the gravity that held every lost hunter, every memory of blood, every echoing sin in its terrible, unbreakable orbit. To confront the orphan was not merely to fight a boss. It was to stand in the epicenter of a metaphysical wound, to face the raw, screaming consequence of a crime that had rewritten the rules of life and death. Its every movement was a spasm of remembered loss, its violent attacks a physical expression of the betrayal it had suffered before it had even drawn its first breath. The fight was a futile, tragic endeavor, for even if one were to strike it down, the cycle was too entrenched, the curse too fundamental. The orphan was the nightmare, and the nightmare was the orphan, a perfect, self-sustaining loop of pain from which there was, and could never be any escape, only an endless, weary reenactment beneath a sky that had forgotten how to stop weeping. The spectral sand, cold and coarse, grinds beneath one's feet with the sound of crushed bone and forgotten prayers. Each step towards the writhing form of the orphan is a descent into a memory that is not your own. A forced pilgrimage into a moment of agony, so pure it has crystallized into a permanent feature of this damned landscape. The air here does not move. It vibrates, humming with a frequency of pure, undiluted malice and sorrow. A sound felt in the teeth and the marrow of the bones rather than heard by the ear. The Black Sea churns not with water, but with a substance more akin to liquid obsidian, throwing up plumes of froth that look like phlegm from a dying leviathan. And the smell is a suffocating blend of brine, necrotic flesh, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone that precedes a world-ending storm. The Often itself is a study in contradiction, a being whose very existence is a paradox. It is both newborn and ancient, a creature of immense, world-shaping power trapped in the reflexive, flailing movements of an infant's trauma. Its body, a pallid, almost luminous white, is slick with a substance that is neither amniotic fluid nor seawater, but some cursed amalgam of both, a physical representation of its blurred origins. Its limbs are too long, too articulate, moving with a jerky, unnatural grace that speaks of a biology never meant for this or any world. The placenta it clutches is not a mere afterbirth. It is a weapon and a shield, a tether and a burden. It is a leathery, mottled thing, veined with pulsing, phosphorescent capillaries that glow with a sickly green light, and when the Often swings it, the air itself seems to tear, ripping open brief, screaming vacuums that pull at the soul. The sound it makes as it whips through the damp air is a wet, meaty thud, a horrifying echo of a heartbeat, the heartbeat of a mother who has been dead for eons. To face it is to understand that this is not a battle in any conventional sense. It is an argument made flesh, a screaming debate against the nature of existence, of justice, of loss. Its attacks are not patterns to be learned so much as emotional states given physical form. A wide, desperate sweep of its grotesque weapon is the physical manifestation of its isolation, a frantic attempt to push the entire, uncaring world away. A leaping, crashing blow is the crushing weight of its abandonment given mass and velocity. Its most terrifying cry, a shriek that seems to drain the light from the already twilit sky, is not a sound but a wave of pure psychic negation, an assertion that since it knows only pain, then all shall know only pain. In its single, huge eye, a pool of blackness set in its pale, twisted face, one can see the reflection of that first, terrible moment. The vast, dead form of Kos, the foreign sky, the incomprehensible cold. There is no thought there, no strategy, only a perfect, infinite feedback loop of the trauma of its birth, a memory that has become its entire universe. And when it falls, when its spectral form is finally, violently stilled by some stubborn, persistent hunter who has fought through the concentric circles of this hell, the victory is hollow, a taste of ashes and salt. The creature does not dissolve in a shower of light or fade with a final, resigned sigh. It convulses, its body contorting in a final, agonized spasm, and from its form erupts a light that is not bright, but dark, an anti-light that sucks the remaining color from the world. And then the most profound silence. It is a silence heavier than any sound, a void where the constant, screaming engine of its pain has been, for a single, fleeting moment, switched off. The rain seems to hesitate. The churning sea stills its fury, becoming as flat and dark as a sheet of polished jet. In this sudden, impossible quiet, the world holds its breath. But the curse is a self-writing scripture, and the ink is grief. From that profound silence, a new sound emerges, faint at first, then growing in clarity and heart-breaking familiarity. It is the cry of a child, not the world-rending shriek of the spectral orphan, but the raw, weak, and desperately lonely mewl of a newborn. It is the same cry that started it all, echoing across the blood-soaked sands, a sound so small, and yet so immense it could fill a cosmos with sorrow. It is the sound of the cycle resetting, of the wound reopening, of the memory asserting its dominance over the present once more. The nightmare is not broken, it has merely taken a breath. The silence was not an ending, but the drawn-in breath before the next verse of an endless lament. The rain begins again, the sea resumes its restless churning, and the oppressive weight of the hamlet's misery settles back over everything, a damp shroud that will never be lifted. The victory was an illusion, a momentary lapse in the eternity of punishment. The orphan is gone, but the orphan is always here, its pain the fundamental law of this broken world. This is the true nature of the hunter's nightmare. It is not a place one escapes. It is a truth one acknowledges. It is the unblinking eye of consequence, the physical manifestation of the principle that some actions are so heinous they do not merely fade into history. They fester, they grow, and they eventually build their own reality to house their own endless retribution. The hunters who are trapped here are not being punished by some external god or devil. They are being consumed by the logical conclusion of their own legacy. They are living inside the scream of the child their forebears created. Every beast they slay is a reflection of the beast within themselves, the bloodlust that began in that seaside massacre. Every drop of blood that spills on the nightmare's cobblestones is a tributary flowing back to the Black Sea that cradles the body of Kos. And what of the scholars, the original architects of this doom? Their fate is perhaps the most bitterly ironic. Willem, the master who sought eyes on the inside, who preached evolution and communion, sits forever by the lake at Biogenwith, his body withered and still, his mind likely expanded into realms of cosmic thought, yet he is powerless to affect the nightmare his curiosity spawned. He is a monument to the futility of knowledge without wisdom, a prisoner of his own intellect, watching the consequences of his ambitions play out in a dimension he can perceive but never touch. His stillness is a stark contrast to the violent, eternal motion of the nightmare, a silent scream of its own. The healing church, built upon the secrets gleaned from the hamlet, became a factory for producing new sinners for the nightmare to claim. Their ministrations, their blood healing, their entire doctrine, was a tree whose roots were sunk deep into the poisoned soil of that original transgression. Every citizen of Yharnam who succumbed to the beastly scourge, every hunter who rose to fight it, was another thread woven into the tapestry of the curse, another soul potentially destined for the endless hunt beneath the orange moon. The nightmare is, in a sense, the church's true cathedral, a hellish mirror of their grandest ambitions, where the communion they sought is replaced by an eternal, solitary confinement within one's own worst deeds. And through it all, the sea murmurs. It is the one constant, the original witness. In the waking world, it is a body of water. In the nightmare, it is a character, a primeval, conscious entity that holds the memory of Kos and the weight of the sin committed upon its shore. Its waves are whispers, its tides are the slow, inexorable pull of guilt, and its depths hold the secrets that Biogenwith so desperately sought and so catastrophically failed to understand. To listen to the sea in the fishing hamlet is to hear the oldest story in the world, a story of life and death, of a mother's love and a child's loss, a story that was perverted into a saga of violation and endless punishment. It is a song without a finale, a melody that loops back upon itself forever, each note saturated with the salt of tears that have been falling since the first stone was laid in Yharnam, since the first blade was lifted in the name of progress, since the moment a god from the stars died on a lonely beach, leaving behind only a crying child and a curse that would outlive the stars themselves. The murmur of the sea in this blighted place is a language of its own, a slow, sibilant whisper that speaks of depths where light has never ventured, of pressures that can crush mountains into glass, and of a loneliness so vast it encompasses entire drowned continents. It does not offer comfort or absolution. It simply is a chronicle written in currents and eddies, its pages turned by the pull of a grief-stricken moon. The water that laps at the spectral shore of the nightmare is not merely a representation of the physical ocean. It is the collective unconscious of the tragedy, the liquid essence of memory itself. Each droplet holds a fragment of the story, the cool, alien touch of Kos's skin as she first breached this world's atmosphere, the warm, coppery spill of the villager's lifeblood, the cold, sterile focus of the scholar's instruments, the hot, saltless tears of a child who never knew a lullaby. The sea here is an archive of pain, and its constant, rhythmic motion is the turning of pages in a book that has no final chapter. One could stand on that shore for an eternity, listening, and never hear the same story twice. In one moment, the hiss of the retreating foam might sound like the last, rattling breath of a dying fisherman, his gills fluttering uselessly in the air. In the next, the crash of a wave against the jagged rocks might echo with the decisive, final thud of Jaemun's burial blade finding its mark, a sound so clean and sharp it seems to cut the very moment in two. And beneath it all, a low, continuous thrum, the bass note of this aquatic dirge. The silent, seismic presence of Kos, her body a sunken continent around which the currents of the curse eternally swirl. Her influence permeates the water, a gentle maternal phosphorescence that is at odds with the violence it has spawned, like the memory of a warm embrace in a frozen, lightless cell. This sea does not lead to other lands. It leads only back to itself, a closed loop of sorrow. To wade into its black, churning waters is to feel the touch of countless regrets, each one a cold, clinging hand pulling you deeper into the collective misery. There is no horizon to aim for, only a perpetual, mist-shrouded expanse that blends seamlessly into the bruised, weeping sky, erasing the very concept of distance and escape. It is the physical manifestation of the inescapable truth that defines this nightmare. There is no away. There is only the endless, recursive here. Every path, no matter how far it seems to stray, through the burning streets of Yharnam, up the impossible geometry of the research hall, into the shrieking frenzy of Mensis, is a long, tortuous tributary that eventually, inevitably, empties back into this sea. It is the sump of the nightmare, the place where all the spilled blood, all the broken prayers, and all the shattered minds finally drain, their residues mingling to feed the roots of the curse that blooms so profusely on its shore. And on that shore, the evidence of this cyclical damnation is etched into every detail. The very sand seems to be composed of ground-down memories, each grain a tiny, hard fragment of a scream, a prayer, or a moment of final, chilling clarity. The dilapidated fishing boats, their hulls splintered and bleached by an ageless sun that never truly shines, are not merely rotting wood. They are the ossified hopes of a people who once cast their nets into the deep, seeking sustenance, and instead pulled forth a miracle that became their doom. Their frayed ropes hang like forgotten nooses, swaying gently in the salt-laced wind, a reminder that for the inhabitants of this place, the end was not a release, but a transformation into a permanent state of accusation. The few remaining villagers who haunt this spectral coastline are now little more than archetypes of vengeance, their original, personal sorrows having been eroded by the endless cycling of the nightmare into a single, unified purpose: to punish the intruder. They are no longer individuals, but instruments of the orphan's rage, their guttural clicks and bubbling moans forming a chorus that chants a single, unending word: guilty. Their attacks are not born of a desire to survive, but of a need to inflict upon others a fraction of the violation they endured. They are the nightmare's immune system, its white blood cells, swarming to the sight of any foreign presence, any hunter, to expel the infection of hope, to reaffirm the absolute dominion of despair. To fight them is to understand that you are not fighting monsters, but the embodied consequences of a sin, and that in striking them down, you are only adding another layer of violence to the foundational atrocity, feeding the very cycle you seek to break. High above this scene of eternal return, seated in her chair within the silent clock tower, Lady Maria is the nightmare's conscience. She is not its ruler, but its most lucid prisoner. Her eternal vigil is a paradox. By guarding the passage to the hamlet, she attempts to atone for her sins, to prevent others from witnessing, and perhaps perpetuating the horror she helped create. Yet, in doing so, she forever binds herself to the memory of that horror, becoming a permanent fixture of the punishment. Her immortality in this place is not a gift, but the ultimate expression of her guilt. She is condemned to remember, perfectly and forever, every detail of the massacre. The quiet ticking of the clock tower's great mechanism is the sound of her own relentless self-recrimination, each tick a moment of the past she cannot change, each tock a reminder of the future she has forfeited. The rakuyo she cast away lies rusting at the bottom of a well, but the weight of it is still in her hand, the phantom grip of a choice that cannot be undone. When a hunter finally challenges her, her resistance is not merely a test of skill. It is a desperate, tragic plea. In the elegant, deadly dance of her blades, there is a profound question. Can you absolve me? Can you end this? And in her defeat, as she slumps to the floor, there is a fleeting moment of peace, a hope that the burden may finally be past. But the nightmare does not allow for such transference. Her form may fade, but her presence remains, a sigh in the gears of the clock tower, a fresh layer of sorrow laid upon the shore, another note in the sea's endless, mournful song. This is the intricate, terrible ecology of the hunter's nightmare. It is a perfectly balanced system of cause and effect, sin and punishment, memory and manifestation. It requires no warden, no external force to maintain its dreadful equilibrium. It is sustained by the very nature of the transgression that created it, a transgression against life itself, against the sacred bond of mother and child, against the simple, profound dignity of a peaceful death. The energy for this entire recursive dimension is generated by the friction between what was done and what should have been, a friction that burns with the heat of 1,000 suns, and yet offers no light, only an endless, consuming fire. It is a monument not to a god, but to a crime, and its halls are not filled with worshippers, but with the perpetrators, their victims, and the countless inheritors of their bloody legacy, all trapped in a dance of violence whose steps were choreographed on a single, rain-lashed afternoon at the end of the world. And so the sea murmurs on. Its voice is the one truly constant narrator of this tale, older than Kos, older than the Hamlet, older than the very concepts of sin and retribution. It was here before the first cell divided in the primordial broth, and it will be here long after the last star winks out in a cold, empty sky. It does not judge, for judgment implies an end, a verdict, a sentence to be carried out. The sea knows only continuity. It knows that the story of Kos and her orphan is just one particularly poignant verse in its epic, a verse about a mother from the stars who became one with the water, and a child whose cry became a new kind of gravity, pulling a world of sinners into an orbit of endless night. To listen is to understand that you too are part of this story, that your presence here, whether as a hunter, a scholar, or merely a dreamer listening to the waves, is another thread woven into the vast, damp tapestry of the nightmare. There is no shore to reach, no other side to find. There is only the deep, the dark, and the whispering, and the slow, patient, inevitable pull of the tide. The weight of this understanding settles not as an epiphany, but as a slow, chilling saturation, like the fog that coils and uncoils itself around the hamlet's broken pilings. It is a knowledge that seeps in through the pause, a damp certainty that this is not a story with a moral, but a natural law written in brine and blood. The very stones here seem to have absorbed the resonance of the tragedy, and if one were to press an ear against their cold, wet surfaces, one might hear the faint, ghostly echo of the orphan's first cry, a vibration trapped in the mineral lattice for all time. The air, thick enough to drink, carries the taste of oxidized metal and long-spoiled amniotic fluid, a sacrament of despair offered to any who dare breathe deeply in this cursed place. This is the profound and unsettling truth of the Great Ones, as revealed not in the lofty, star-charted schemas of Biogenwith, but in the visceral, suffering flesh of Kos. Their power is inextricably bound to a vulnerability that is almost human in its fragility. They are not remote, untouchable intellects spinning cold equations in the void. They love, they lose, they grieve. They bear children, and they can, as Kos so terribly demonstrates, die. Their consciousness may span galaxies, their forms may defy mortal comprehension, but their hearts, in whatever metaphysical form they possess them, can be broken. The scholars, in their desperate, bloody scramble for eyes, missed the most important insight of all: that to commune with a great one is not to grasp an abstract power, but to touch a profound and often sorrowful subjectivity. They sought a key to the cosmos and found, instead, a mother's corpse, and in their failure to recognize the sacredness of that loss, they doomed themselves to an eternity within the echo of her child's weeping. The sin was not merely one of violence, but of a specific, catastrophic failure of empathy. It was the sin of seeing a miracle and perceiving only a mechanism, of witnessing a tomb and seeing only a laboratory. The hunters and scholars looked upon the transformed villagers and saw specimens, their humanity erased by the scaly sheen of their new skin. They looked upon the colossal, silent form of Kos and saw a resource, a library of flesh from which to loot their enlightenment. In their monomaniacal focus on the how, they became utterly blind to the why. They never stopped to consider the story, the emotional and spiritual cataclysm that had rewritten the biology of this place. They did not hear the sorrow in the villagers' clicks and moans. They heard only the chatter of animals. They did not feel the maternal aura lingering around Kos's body. They felt only the tantalizing radiation of power. This epistemological arrogance, this reduction of the sacred and the tragic to mere data, is the core of the curse. The hunter's nightmare is, therefore, a brutal, poetic correction. It is a realm where empathy is enforced through shared suffering, where the perpetrators are forced to feel the consequences of their actions, not just intellectually understand them. It is a world built not on logic, but on the raw, screaming truth of emotional cause and effect. And what of the child, the orphan, at the center of this storm? Its existence poses a question that hangs in the saturated air, unanswered and unanswerable. What is the nature of a being born of pure loss? It never knew its mother's touch, her voice, her comforting presence. Its first and only inheritance was her corpse and the violent, violating attention of strangers. Its very soul is a void shaped like the mother it never had, and that void howls with a wind that has scoured the edges of reality itself. The spectral form one battles on the shore is not the orphan as it was, but the orphan as its grief has sculpted it, a being of pure, reactive anguish. Its every action is a reflection of that foundational moment. Its desperate, flailing attacks are the thrashings of an infant in a cold crib. The placenta it wields so violently is a perverse substitute for the mother it should be clinging to, a wretched comfort object turned into an instrument of wrath. It is a godling whose only divine power is the absolute, universe-altering intensity of its own pain. To witness this, to truly comprehend the endless, cyclical nature of its suffering, is to feel a despair that is both personal and cosmic. It is the despair of realizing that some wounds are too deep to heal, that some injustices are too fundamental to be rectified. The hunter who travels through the nightmare, fighting through its legions of tormented souls, may believe they are on a quest for escape, for purification, or for vengeance. But with each step deeper into the gloom, the truth becomes clearer. They are not a savior, but a participant. They are another variable in the equation, another spark in the self-perpetuating fire. Their very presence, their struggle, their violence, is a form of fuel. By fighting the manifestations of the curse, they are acknowledging its power, reinforcing its reality. The nightmare feeds on the effort to destroy it, for that effort is born of the same legacy of violence that created it. This is the final, chilling elegance of the hunter's nightmare's design. It is a trap that baits itself with the promise of resolution. It offers the illusion of a final boss, a core to be struck, a heart to be stilled. And when that heart is, for a moment, stilled, the brief silence that follows is the most cruel trick of all. It is a glimpse of a world without the pain, a world where the rain has stopped and the sea is calm. It is a fleeting, tantalizing vision of peace, a single, pure note of silence in the endless cacophony. And in that moment, a hunter might dare to hope. They might believe that they have broken the cycle, that they have absolved the sin, that they have finally, mercifully put the child to rest. But the hope is the deepest cut. The returning cry, that weak, newborn wail rising from the silence, is not just a reset of the cycle. It is a lesson. It is the nightmare reminding its inhabitants that grief of this magnitude is not a problem to be solved, but a state of being to be endured. The orphan cannot be saved because its tragedy is already complete. It is always and forever the child on the beach, its mother dead beside it. To try and change, that is to misunderstand the very nature of time and memory within this realm. The past here is not a foreign country, it is the only country. The moment of transgression is not a memory, it is the present tense, eternally unfolding, eternally consuming any future that might try to grow in its shadow. So the hunter stands on the shore, the spectral sand shifting uneasily beneath their feet, the black water pulling at their resolve. The fight is over, and yet it has just begun. It always has. There is no victory to be won, only a truth to be carried. The weight of the sin, the echo of the cry, the taste of the salt, these become part of the hunter now, a burden acquired in the dream that will linger in the waking world like the scent of the sea on a coat. They may leave the nightmare, but the nightmare does not leave them. They have walked in a world built from a sorrow so profound it has its own geography, and such a journey cannot be undone. They have heard the sea's oldest, saddest song, and now, forever after, they will hear its melody humming just beneath the surface of their own world. A constant, quiet reminder of the mother, the child, and the endless, whispering tide. The burden of this knowledge is a physical thing, a leaden cloak of comprehension that makes the very act of lifting a hand feel like a monumental effort. It is the understanding that one has not merely visited a place of horror, but has immersed oneself in the fundamental substance of a sin, and has emerged stained by its metaphysical residue. The hunter, should they ever find a path back to the waking world, will carry the hamlet with them. It will be in the way the morning light catches the dew on a spiderweb, reminding them of the perpetual, beaded moisture on the oilskin cloaks of the fishmen. It will be in the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against a far-off shore, a sound that will no longer signify peace or the vastness of nature, but the slow, grinding teeth of a cosmic, grieving mechanism. The scent of rain on hot pavement will forever be tinged, in their perception, with the phantom odors of decay and alien birth. This is the true, lingering curse, the one that transcends the physical boundaries of the nightmare. It is the curse of memory, of an empathy forced upon the unwilling. The hunter who entered seeking glory or cure or simple answers has instead become a vessel for a story too terrible to be contained. They have felt the orphan's rage not as an enemy's emotion, but as a climate, an atmosphere they were forced to breathe. They have walked through the ghost of Lady Maria's regret and felt its cold, elegant structure encase their own heart. They are no longer just a hunter of beasts. They are a scribe of sorrow, a living archive of a crime they did not commit, but can now never forget. Every future hunt in the waking world's Yharnam will be shadowed by the memory of the first hunt, the one that started it all on that desolate shore. The snarls of the beasts will seem less bestial and more like the guttural, accusing cliques of the hamlet's inhabitants. The healing blood, that miraculous, cursed ambrosia, will feel slick and warm with a guilt that dates back to the desecration of a god. And what of the world to which they return? Is it any more real than the nightmare they have left behind? Or is it merely a different layer of the same dream, a slightly less concentrated dilution of the same cosmic truths? The waking world of Yharnam is itself a place steeped in nightmare, its streets choked with beastly scourge, its skies periodically torn by pale blood moons and the wailing of unseen infants. The line between the two states, waking and dreaming, has been worn thin, a threadbare curtain through which the shadows of greater tragedies are constantly cast. The hunter who has been to the fishing hamlet may come to see their own reality as just another recursive loop, a slightly slower, more diffuse version of the same eternal struggle. The healing church, with its spires reaching for a heaven they have defiled, is but a waking world echo of the clock tower where Maria sits in vigil. The forbidden woods, with its mutated, snake-ridden inhabitants, is a terrestrial cousin to the hamlet's own forced evolution. The entire city of Yharnam begins to feel like a preliminary sketch for the more refined, concentrated hell of the nightmare, a proving ground for the sins that would later be codified into a permanent, punishing dimension. This perspective breeds a profound and unsettling solitude. The hunter walks among other people, other hunters, but they are separated by an unbridgeable gulf of knowing. They see the same sights, fight the same beasts, but where others see a monster to be slain, the hunter who has returned from the sea sees a potential future resident of the nightmare, another soul destined for the eternal hunt. They look upon the desperate, blood-addled citizens and see not just victims of a plague, but inheritors of a legacy they cannot possibly comprehend. This knowledge is a poison that isolates even as it enlightens. It strips the world of its simple certainties and replaces them with the heavy, complex weight of cosmic irony and endless cycles. The hunter becomes a ghost in their own life, a spectator to a play whose tragic finale they have already witnessed, performed on a different stage. Yet within this crushing isolation, there might exist a sliver of something else, not hope, for hope is too bright and brittle a thing for this world, but perhaps a purpose. A purpose born not from the desire to break the unbreakable cycle, but to bear witness to it, to carry the story. The scholars of Biogenworth sought to hoard knowledge, to use it as a tool for their own ascension, and in doing so, they corrupted it. But what if the knowledge of the hamlet, the story of Kos and her orphan, is not meant to be used, but simply to be known? What if its value lies not in the power it can grant, but in the warning it represents? The hunter, as the sole living soul to have traversed the heart of the curse and returned with their mind, however scarred, intact, becomes a living monument to the cost of transgression. Their very existence is a testament to the fact that some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed, and that the pursuit of knowledge without wisdom is a path that leads not to the stars, but into a prison of one's own making. This, then, is the final legacy of the fishing hamlet. It is not a place one conquers. It is a lesson one absorbs. Its tides are the rhythms of cause and effect, its cliffs the unyielding face of consequence. The mother, Kos, becomes a symbol of the sacredness that exists beyond understanding. A reminder that the universe contains not just cold, indifferent laws, but also warmth, love, and loss on a scale that can shatter worlds. The orphan becomes the eternal voice of the victim, a cry that, even when silenced, continues to reverberate through the architecture of reality, shaping everything in its path. And the sea remains. It is the great, patient, and unforgetting chronicler. It holds the memory of the god who fell from the stars and the child who was left to weep. It whispers the story to anyone who will listen, its voice a low, relentless murmur that speaks of depths where light has failed, of pressures that have forged diamonds from despair, and of a loneliness that is the true, final shape of the cosmos. To hear it is to be changed, to understand it is to be burdened, and to carry it is the only form of absolution this story will ever allow. The murmur of the sea in this blighted place is a language of its own, a slow, sibilant whisper that speaks of depths where light has never ventured, of pressures that can crush mountains into glass, and of a loneliness so vast it encompasses entire drowned continents. It does not offer comfort or absolution. It simply is a chronicle written in currents and eddies, its pages turned by the pull of a grief-stricken moon. The water that laps at the spectral shore of the nightmare is not merely a representation of the physical ocean. It is the collective unconscious of the tragedy, the liquid essence of memory itself. Each droplet holds a fragment of the story, the cool, alien touch of Koss's skin as she first breached this world's atmosphere, the warm, coppery spill of the villager's lifeblood, the cold, sterile focus of the scholar's instruments, the hot, saltless tears of a child who never knew a lullaby. The sea here is an archive of pain, and its constant, rhythmic motion is the turning of pages in a book that has no final chapter. One could stand on that shore for an eternity, listening, and never hear the same story twice. In one moment, the hiss of the retreating foam might sound like the last, rattling breath of a dying fisherman, his gills fluttering uselessly in the air. In the next, the crash of a wave against the jagged rocks might echo with the decisive, final thud of Jayaman's burial blade finding its mark. A sound so clean and sharp, it seems to cut the very moment in two. And beneath it all, a low, continuous thrum, the bass note of this aquatic dirge. The silent, seismic presence of Koss, her body a sunken continent around which the currents of the curse eternally swirl. Her influence permeates the water, a gentle maternal phosphorescence that is at odds with the violence it has spawned, like the memory of a warm embrace in a frozen, lightless cell. This sea does not lead to other lands. It leads only back to itself, a closed loop of sorrow. To wade into its black, churning waters is to feel the touch of countless regrets, each one a cold, clinging hand pulling you deeper into the collective misery. There is no horizon to aim for, only a perpetual, mist-shrouded expanse that blends seamlessly into the bruised, weeping sky, erasing the very concept of distance and escape. It is the physical manifestation of the inescapable truth that defines this nightmare. There is no away. There is only the endless, recursive here. Every path, no matter how far it seems to stray, through the burning streets of Yharnam, up the impossible geometry of the research hall, into the shrieking frenzy of Mensis, is a long, tortuous tributary that eventually, inevitably, empties back into this sea. It is the sump of the nightmare, the place where all the spilled blood, all the broken prayers, and all the shattered minds finally drain, their residues mingling to feed the roots of the curse that blooms so profusely on its shore. And on that shore, the evidence of this cyclical damnation is etched into every detail. The very sand seems to be composed of ground-down memories, each grain a tiny, hard fragment of a scream, a prayer, or a moment of final, chilling clarity. The dilapidated fishing boats, their hulls splintered and bleached by an ageless sun that never truly shines, are not merely rotting wood. They are the ossified hopes of a people who once cast their nets into the deep, seeking sustenance, and instead pulled forth a miracle that became their doom. Their frayed ropes hang like forgotten nooses, swaying gently in the salt-laced wind, a reminder that for the inhabitants of this place, the end was not a release, but a transformation into a permanent state of accusation. The few remaining villagers who haunt this spectral coastline are now little more than archetypes of vengeance, their original, personal sorrows having been eroded by the endless cycling of the nightmare into a single, unified purpose: to punish the intruder. They are no longer individuals, but instruments of the orphan's rage, their guttural clicks and bubbling moans forming a chorus that chants a single, unending word: guilty. Their attacks are not born of a desire to survive, but of a need to inflict upon others a fraction of the violation they endured. They are the nightmare's immune system, its white blood cells, swarming to the sight of any foreign presence, any hunter, to expel the infection of hope, to reaffirm the absolute dominion of despair. To fight them is to understand that you are not fighting monsters, but the embodied consequences of a sin, and that in striking them down, you are only adding another layer of violence to the foundational atrocity, feeding the very cycle you seek to break. High above this scene of eternal return, seated in her chair within the silent clock tower, Lady Maria is the nightmare's conscience. She is not its ruler, but its most lucid prisoner. Her eternal vigil is a paradox. By guarding the passage to the hamlet, she attempts to atone for her sins, to prevent others from witnessing, and perhaps perpetuating the horror she helped create. Yet, in doing so, she forever binds herself to the memory of that horror, becoming a permanent fixture of the punishment. Her immortality in this place is not a gift, but the ultimate expression of her guilt. She is condemned to remember, perfectly and forever, every detail of the massacre. The quiet ticking of the clock tower's great mechanism is the sound of her own relentless self-recrimination, each tick a moment of the past she cannot change, each tock a reminder of the future she has forfeited. The rakuyo she cast away lies rusting at the bottom of a well, but the weight of it is still in her hand, the phantom grip of a choice that cannot be undone. When a hunter finally challenges her, her resistance is not merely a test of skill. It is a desperate, tragic plea. In the elegant, deadly dance of her blades, there is a profound question. Can you absolve me? Can you end this? And in her defeat, as she slumps to the floor, there is a fleeting moment of peace, a hope that the burden may finally be past. But the nightmare does not allow for such transference. Her form may fade, but her presence remains, a sigh in the gears of the clock tower, a fresh layer of sorrow laid upon the shore, another note in the sea's endless, mournful song. This is the intricate, terrible ecology of the hunter's nightmare. It is a perfectly balanced system of cause and effect, sin and punishment, memory and manifestation. It requires no warden, no external force to maintain its dreadful equilibrium. It is sustained by the very nature of the transgression that created it, a transgression against life itself, against the sacred bond of mother and child, against the simple, profound dignity of a peaceful death. The energy for this entire recursive dimension is generated by the friction between what was done and what should have been, a friction that burns with the heat of 1,000 suns, and yet offers no light, only an endless, consuming fire. It is a monument not to a god, but to a crime, and its halls are not filled with worshippers, but with the perpetrators, their victims, and the countless inheritors of their bloody legacy, all trapped in a dance of violence whose steps were choreographed on a single, rain-lashed afternoon at the end of the world. And so the sea murmurs on. Its voice is the one truly constant narrator of this tale, older than Kos, older than the Hamlet, older than the very concepts of sin and retribution. It was here before the first cell divided in the primordial broth, and it will be here long after the last star winks out in a cold, empty sky. It does not judge, for judgment implies an end, a verdict, a sentence to be carried out. The sea knows only continuity. It knows that the story of Kos and her orphan is just one particularly poignant verse in its epic, a verse about a mother from the stars who became one with the water, and a child whose cry became a new kind of gravity, pulling a world of sinners into an orbit of endless night. To listen is to understand that you too are part of this story, that your presence here, whether as a hunter, a scholar, or merely a dreamer listening to the waves, is another thread woven into the vast, damp tapestry of the nightmare. There is no shore to reach, no other side to find. There is only the deep, the dark, and the whispering, and the slow, patient, inevitable pull of the tide. The silence that follows the orphan's cry is not empty, but full, a plenum of ache, a saturation of spent fury and sorrow that has exhausted itself into a kind of terrible, vibrating stillness. The Black Sea, for a moment, becomes a sheet of obsidian, its surface unmarred by wave or ripple, as if the entire nightmare holds its breath, waiting to see if this time the cycle might truly break. But the stillness is a lie, a pause in the rhythm, not its end. The air itself feels heavy with this suspended grief, each molecule laden with the weight of what has been and what must, inevitably, come again. The spectral sand no longer grinds, but seems to absorb sound, creating a vacuum where the only thing that exists is the slow, internal thunder of your own heartbeat. A frail drum trying to mark time in a realm that has devoured time itself. In this hushed interlude, the details of the shore become hyperreal, etched with a clarity that is almost painful. You see the individual, glistening strands of seaweed clinging to the waterlogged timber of the piers, each one a slick, dark green ribbon trembling with a life that is not its own. You notice the way the mist, now still, hangs in the air like a billion tiny, suspended pearls. each one reflecting the dim, soulless light of this place in a perfect, miniature panorama of despair. The colossal form of Kos, beached and eternal, seems to loom larger in the quiet, her pale flesh not merely glowing, but seeming to breathe, a slow, tidal expansion and contraction that is less a sign of life and more the landscape itself settling, a geological process of mourning. The lines and curves of her body are not those of a corpse, but of a topography, a mountain range of loss, a valley of silence, a coastline of infinite resignation. To look upon her is to understand that she is not just a body. She is the bedrock upon which this entire dimension is built, and her sorrow is the magnetic north to which every compass of suffering here eventually points. And then, as if from a great distance, the sound returns. It begins not as a cry, but as a vibration in the sand, a faint tremor that travels up through the soles of your feet and into the bone. It is the feeling of a great machine, dormant for a single, precious second, shuddering back to life. The obsidian surface of the sea fractures, not with waves, but with a network of fine, hairline cracks that spread like a web from some unseen point of impact far beneath the surface. A deep, groaning pressure builds in the air, a subaudible hum that makes the teeth ache and the vision blur. It is the sound of memory reasserting its dominion, of the past refusing to be past. The mist begins to coil and move again, drawn by an invisible current back towards the center of the shore, back towards the empty space beside the mother where the orphan will once again manifest. This is the true horror, the one that lives in the space between the cycles, the anticipation. The knowledge of what is to come is a torture more refined than the violence itself. You know the sequence. You know the weak, mewling cry will soon pierce the silence, a sound that is both newborn and impossibly ancient. You know the spectral form will coalesce from the mist and the misery, a thing of writhing, pale anguish clutching its wretched, placental weapon. You know the fight will begin again, the same desperate, flailing attacks, the same world-ending shrieks, the same futile, heart-breaking struggle. This foreknowledge is a cage. It robs the moment of its spontaneity and replaces it with the grinding certainty of ritual. You are not an actor in a drama. You are a priest in a blasphemous mass, reciting lines that were written in blood eons ago, performing a sacrifice that has already happened, is happening, and will always happen. The first droplet of rain that breaks the stillness feels like a nail being driven into the coffin of hope. It is a cold, perfect sphere that strikes the back of your hand with a tiny, definitive tap. Then another, and another. The rhythm is slow at first, a funeral dirge played on a drum of skin and water, but it quickly gathers pace, until the air is once again a solid wall of weeping moisture. The sea begins to churn, its black water heaving as if in labor, and the cracks on its surface widen into fissures that spew forth a geyser of bitter, salt-laced spray. The wind returns not as a sigh, but as a low, guttural moan that seems to emanate from the very throat of the landscape. The nightmare is waking up. It is stretching its limbs, shaking off the brief, deceptive slumber, and preparing to enact its only purpose once more. And then it comes, the cry. It is not loud, but it cuts through the burgeoning storm with the sharpness of a scalpel. It is a sound of pure, unadulterated need, the sound of a consciousness realizing its own isolation for the 10,000th time. It is a question that has no answer, a protest against a universe that allowed this to be. It rises from the sand beside Kos, a wisp of palpable agony that twists and knots itself into a familiar, terrible shape. The orphan is born again. Its form shimmers into existence, a pale ghost against the darker gray of the rain and the mother's flank. It curls in on itself for a moment, a pathetic, fetal knot of suffering, and then it uncoils, rising on its two long limbs, its single black eye fixing on you not with hatred, but with a kind of bleak, cosmic recognition. You are here, you are part of the ritual. You are the other necessary component in this equation of pain. The placenta, slick and pulsing, is already in its grasp, not a tool, but a limb, an organ of both comfort and violence. The fight begins again. There is no hesitation, no ceremony. It is as if the previous confrontation never ended, as if the brief silence was merely the time it took for both of you to draw a single, shuddering breath. The same sweeping arcs of the placental mass tear through the rain-filled air. The same leaping, crashing impacts send shockwaves through the saturated ground. The same psychic shrieks batter against the walls of your mind, each one a fresh wave of the orphan's foundational despair. But this time it is different for you. The visceral terror, the struggle for survival, is now layered with a profound and weary melancholy. You are not just fighting a creature, you are collaborating in a tragedy. Every dodge, every parry, every counterattack is a line you are speaking in a play whose ending you already know. You are dancing with a ghost, and the music is the same damned song it has always been. As the conflict wears on, a new understanding dawns, cold and clear as the water that soaks you to the skin. The orphan is not trying to kill you. It is trying to make you understand. Its violence is a language, the only language it has ever known. Each blow is a word, each shriek a sentence, each frantic, flailing combination a paragraph in its autobiography of loss. It is screaming its story at you over and over again, using the grammar of pain and the syntax of wrath. It is saying, this is what it feels like to be me. This is what it feels like to be born into death. This is what it feels like to have your only connection to the universe severed before you ever knew its touch. To fight it is to be screamed at in a tongue of pure, emotional extremity. And in a horrifying moment of clarity, you realize you are starting to comprehend it. You can feel the desolation in the arc of its weapon, the isolation in the wide, desperate sweep of its attacks, the bottomless, infantile rage in its crashing, ground-shaking leaps. You are not just an opponent, you are its audience, its confessor, the only one who can bear witness to the endless, screaming truth of its existence. This realization changes the nature of the battle. It becomes less a fight and more a grueling, physical seance. You are channeling its pain, allowing it to express its infinite grief through the medium of conflict. Your own movements become less aggressive and more responsive, a dance of empathy rather than a struggle for dominance. You are not trying to win, you are trying to listen. And in listening, you absorb more of its sorrow, feeling it seep into your own spirit like the damp into your clothes. The line between you and the often blurs. Its cries echo in your own chest. Its sense of betrayal becomes a bitter taste in your own mouth. You are sharing its nightmare not as a visitor, but as a temporary resident. When the final blow is struck, it feels different. There is no triumph, no surge of victory. There is only a profound, exhausting release, as if a vast, internal pressure has been vented. The orphan does not convulse with rage this time, but seems to unravel. Its spectral form loosens, its edges fraying like mist in a sudden wind. It looks at you, and in its single black eye, there is a flicker of something that is not pain, perhaps a moment of connection, of being truly seen and heard for the first time in its eternal, tortured existence. It does not cry out. It simply lets out a long, slow, silent exhalation, and then its form dissolves, not into nothingness, but into the rain and the mist, becoming one with the very atmosphere of the nightmare it sustains. It has not been defeated, it has been, for a moment, understood. And in that understanding, it has been granted a fleeting, fragile form of peace. The silence returns, but this time it is a different quality of silence. It is not the tense, anticipatory pause of before, but a deep, resonant quiet, like the stillness in a cathedral after the last note of a requiem has faded. The rain gentles, becoming a soft, pattering whisper on the water. The sea calms, its waves reduced to a slow, rhythmic lapping against the sand, a sound that is almost soothing. The oppressive weight of the hamlet's misery seems to lift just a little. The air feels lighter, easier to breathe. It is as if the act of bearing witness, of truly receiving the orphan's story, has momentarily alleviated the pressure of the curse. The cycle has not been broken, it can never be broken. But a crack has appeared in its relentless logic, a space where something other than pure suffering can, for a heartbeat, exist. You stand on the shore, the gentle rain washing the salt and the spectral residue from your skin. You look at the massive, silent form of Kos, and for the first time, she does not seem like a monument to tragedy, but simply like a mother resting. The memory of her is no longer a screaming wound, but a quiet, enduring presence. The sea murmurs its old, old song, but the melody has changed. The notes of rage and retribution have softened, replaced by a slower, more melancholic air of remembrance. It is a lullaby now, a song for a sleeping mother and a child whose pain has, for now, been heard. This is the only conclusion this story permits. Not an ending, but a respite. Not a victory, but a truce. The hunter's nightmare remains, its geometry of punishment intact, its legions of lost hunters still wandering its blood-soaked streets. The sin of Biogenwith is still a stain upon the cosmos, and the grief of the orphan is still the engine of this world. But for a time, a night, a year, a century, the screaming will stop. The rain will be just rain, and the sea will be just the sea, and the memory of a mother's love will be allowed to exist for a little while, unmolested by the echoes of her child's rage. It is a small thing, a fragile thing, a single, quiet eddy in the relentless current of the curse. But in a story of endless night, even the smallest, most fleeting glimpse of moonbreak on the water is a kind of miracle. And as you turn from the shore, the soft, salt-laced wind at your back feels less like a push from a prison and more like a gentle, sorrowful farewell.